reclined in the darkness, puffing on a cigarette and listening to the silence. It was bad tonight. The silence. My ears rang with it and my breath sounded like an October gale. And I closed my eyes, dragging the cigarette to my lips and sucking gently on it. The ashes roared and the smoke rose loudly from the tip. I was on my back, lying on my bed in my apartment. The dark windows were closed against the moonlight and I licked my dry lips indifferently. And it was late. Too late to be awake. And regardless, I had given up on sleep hours ago. I couldn't shut down. I couldn't shut off. My mind was an unending engine of thought, a derailed train of constant images and meaningless echoes. And it was killing me. I felt the familiar heaviness settle over my chest, a wet blanket that clung to my skin. My heartbeat slowed and a lump threatened to rise in my throat. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't continue to drown in my own unhappiness. I was a prisoner to it, a shackled, howling soul. God damn it, I muttered, worried for a split second my voice would crack with emotion. I wanted to sit up, get off this bed, turn on some light, but I found that I simply couldn't. What was the point? So I could see my own misery. I took another drag of the cigarette, closing my eyes. I bit my lip as smoke rocketed from my nose. Christ, it was bad tonight. How did I claw myself out of this pit? It had been getting worse recently. Insomnia had slowly begun to settle, and the more relentless my mind grew. I didn't know how to stop. Didn't know how to fight back against the onslaught of crippling sadness. I was impossibly alone. I lived in a ground floor apartment. Didn't know any of my neighbors. In a town that I wasn't familiar with. I had moved here out of desperation, the prospect of a job drawing me out of my comfort zone. And now my friends and my family lay hundreds of miles away, tucked into their beds, leaving me isolated in an unknown land. I had gotten the job, but I didn't work for anyone my age. I didn't know where to meet people. I didn't know how to meet people. I tried a few times to go out and to converse with others. It hadn't ended well, and I drove home in a miserable state of self-loathing and dark thought. Everyone knew everyone but me. I was the outsider. They were the clique and I was the clack. I spent my nights browsing Facebook and Twitter, staring at the happiness of others, each status and picture another shovel of dirt down my dark hole. And my mind wept, but my eyes remained dry. A cold, frozen stare into the lives of others. Everyone was getting married, everyone was having kids, and here I was, single and forgotten. I stubbed my cigarette out onto the ashtray and foolishly checked my phone. No texts, no calls, not even a single notification. It was as silent as the darkness around me. I tossed my phone aside and I dragged my fingers across my face, sighing and feeling that lump rise in my throat again. I forced myself up, begging not to be defeated by this. I went to the window and I pulled the curtains aside, allowing the full moon to ignite the room with its cool glow. And I stared up into its brilliance, a sugar cookie in a sugar-dusted sky. And I smiled at that, but wished that I hadn't. I lowered my eyes to gaze at the woods lining the edge of the property. My hopeless view. Black shadows stared back at me from the spots between the trees, and I waved at them and hoped that nothing would wave back. I turned around and surveyed my apartment, the shadows pushed aside by white moonlight. Just a boring studio apartment in a boring apartment building. My bed and my couch lay feet from one another, and I sighed. For some reason, it made me incredibly depressed. I dug into my pocket for another cigarette and smacked one from the battered pack. As I flicked my lighter, it hit me. And it hit me hard. Tears sprang from my eyes, and suddenly the cigarette was falling from my lips. And I sank to my knees in the middle of my room and covered my face with my hands. And I cried silently, my body trembling against the onslaught. I silently stalked the shelves, my mind a million miles away. People pushed around me trying to reach for their desired product, and I tried my best to ignore them. I was invisible, a faceless, nameless employee for a grocery store chain. I didn't have an identity, didn't hold any kind of value. I was just something that was in the way. I reached down and placed another box of crackers on the shelf, and I stared at the yellow cardboard container. There was a picture of a guy my age with his arm around a beautiful young lady. They were laughing and eating the crackers. And they looked so happy. Maybe I just needed more fucking crackers in my life. How do I get a girl like that? I muttered, reaching up and tracing a finger over the young lady. I sighed and picked up another box. My manager was squawking something over the intercom, but I blocked him out. It probably wasn't meant for me. I wasn't even sure anyone knew that I worked here. No one ever talked to me. No one engaged with me. Nothing. I couldn't even remember if I had been trained. What a career move that I had made. What was it about me that was so remarkably unremarkable? Why didn't anyone reach out to me? Was it my face? Was it the way that I dressed? I tried not to think how happy I'd be if anyone would just ask me how my day was going. I craved interaction. Just a simple acknowledgement of my existence. I suddenly felt my it crawling up my throat, that familiar, pitiful ache. I shut my eyes and I tried to steady my breathing. Please. Not now. Not at work. Someone bumped into me and I stumbled, opening my eyes to see a shopper bustling down the aisle without so much as a glance back. And I ran to the bathroom. I grit my teeth, fighting against the oncoming wave as best as I could. Thankfully, the bathroom was empty and I closed myself off at the far stall. I sat down on the toilet seat and I covered my hands with my face. The quiet soothed me and I shook away the encroaching darkness. I wasn't going to cry. God, you're pitiful, I whispered, my own voice sounding weak in my ears. Why the hell do you have to be like this? Why can't you just make friends and have a normal social life like everyone else? Why do you have to be so pathetic all the time? Man up, for Christ's sake! It was useless, as all my pep talks were. I shut my eyes once again and I ran my hands over my face, forcing the emotion to remain on the inside. And suddenly I noticed there was someone standing directly in front of the stall that I was in. I gasped, sitting upright. The unexpected presence startled me. No, it wasn't someone. It was something. 2 black slabs of rotting meat oozed under the tile. A pair of mangled feet that were attached to black crusted legs. Go away, I whispered, refusing to look at the face that peeked in at me from the crack in the door. The feet didn't move and I finally pulled my eyes up to stare at the masked head. The face was covered in what looked like a Chinese theater mask. Its features were exaggerated and colored a pale white. Its mouth was pulled down into a frozen frown, and its eyes were 2 crescent moons that looked like they were crying. and the creature tilted its head at me. Its molded, immobile mask pressed against the crack in the door stall, and I could see its dark wings rise from its back to scrape against the ceiling. The stall next to me shuddered, and I looked up to see another of the creatures peering down at me, its masked face mirroring the one in front of me. And I pulled my legs into myself, huddled on the toilet, and buried my face into my knees. I could hear the creatures breathing. A sad, low pull of labored breath. "Please, leave me alone," I cried, feeling tears pool in my eyes. "Just leave me be." And suddenly the bathroom door opened as two customers walked in, chatting as they went to their urinals. And I jumped in, I looked around. The noise snapped me from my distraught state. The two creatures were gone. I wiped my eyes and I exited the stall. Neither of the customers looking at me as I left the bathroom. I pulled my car into my apartment complex and parked. And I sat there for a moment, staring into the middle distance, not sure that I was prepared to face another night of isolation. I considered going out later, but the inevitable failure of hopeful conversation with others grounded me. No one was going to talk to me. No one would want to hang out with me. And I was the most boring person alive, and my skill at small talk was seriously lacking. With downcast eyes, I got out of my car and I walked to my door. I heard someone talking, and I looked up and I saw a woman was struggling with her keys under a mountain of grocery bags that she was juggling. She was trying to open the door next to my apartment. She looked my age, and she was gorgeous. I swallowed and I rushed to help her, heart thundering. She smiled at me as I approached, a slight blush coloring her fair cheeks. Her brown eyes glowed under a mop of shining blonde hair, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Not the most graceful of moments," she said as I came to her aid, plastering a smile to my face. "It's okay," I said, taking a few of her bags as she dug into her pocket for her keys. "I'm Amanda," she said, shooting me another smile. "I moved in this morning. Just ran out to grab some groceries before I started unpacking. Do you live here too?" And I nodded. "Yeah, I'm actually the next door down. I guess we're neighbors. I'm James." Amanda finally pulled her keys from her pocket and opened her door. "Well, it's nice to meet you, James. I really appreciate your help. Today's been chaos." Not sure what I was supposed to do, I slowly followed her into her apartment, sheepishly grinning. Amanda tossed her keys onto the kitchen counter and then took the bags from me. Boxes littered the space, towering structures of labeled cardboard. My eyes found Amanda's and I offered her another smile. "Looks like you have a lot of unpacking still to do." She groaned as she put away her food. "Ugh, don't remind me. I'm so tired. I just want to go to sleep and wake up with it all organized and done." My heart was racing in my chest. She was so cute. The way that she talked, the way that the corners of her mouth slightly turned up to form a smile, the way her eyes looked at me. Two stunning pools of soft autumn. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something amazing. I tried to cram all of my insane thoughts of the future back inside of my head. I had a bad tendency to immediately project the future upon meeting someone new. An imaginary life played out before me where Amanda and I slowly became closer and closer until we finally hung out at each other's apartments all the time, spent every free moment together. And then our first kiss. Oh, how glorious that would be. Who knows, right? Maybe this interaction was fate finally giving in to my pleas. I knew I was rushing this fantasy. I had just met her a few seconds ago, but I couldn't help the way that my mind worked. It was batshit crazy, but for the first time as long as I could remember, I felt hope. It was just the slightest sliver of moonlight, a crescent cut of white that winked at me between the dark forest. But it was something. "James?" I snapped out of my thoughts and immediately felt stupid. How long had I been standing here like an idiot, lost in my own head? Sorry, what's up? I spaced out for a moment, I said, embarrassed. And she laughed. I do that all the time. No worries. I asked if you've lived here for very long, in the complex. Oh, I said, nodding. Yeah, I've been here for 3 years now. She finished putting the food away and balled up the bags, tossing them aside casually. Do you like it here? Is it a good place to live? I don't know much about the area. I moved here because I was offered a job and basically picked a place out of random, hoping that it would work out. I shrugged to try not to stare at her. She was just so pretty. Everyone keeps to themselves for the most part. I like it well enough. And she smiled. Good. My boyfriend told me that we should find another place, but I held out for this one. He'll be happy to hear that it's not a crap hole. And I felt like I'd been shot through the heart. That word. Boyfriend. I could physically feel myself deflate, a rush of the old darkness creeping back into my head. Of course she had a boyfriend. What was I thinking? Someone as beautiful as her. God, I was stupid. Glad to hear it, I mumbled, and I turned to go. Well, I'll let you get back to it. It was nice to meet you, Amanda. She followed me through the door and put a hand on my shoulder. It's great to meet you, James. I'm sure that we'll be seeing a lot of each other. And thanks for your help. I really appreciate it. I walked out her open door and turned, giving her a little wave. I tried to hide the disappointment on my face. I'll see you around. She closed the door and I could hear her lock it. And I plodded to my own door and keyed it open. The apartment gasped as I entered. Silent and dark. My familiar prison. God damn it, I muttered, feeling the tide beginning to lick at my ankles. Oh, it was there all right, just waiting to drag me back into its icy depths. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my back sliding down the wood until I was sitting against it. I put my face in my hands. Was this just my life? A constant series of letdowns and misery? Would I ever find someone to make me happy? Would I ever find a way to be happy? What was fucking wrong with me? Why did I take everything so hard? Why did I let little things get to me? Why was I affected so deeply by the slightest disappointments? And I suddenly looked up. One of the creatures was staring at me from the end of the hall. Its black wings scraped against the wall as it cocked its mask head at me. The strange, sad mask covered its skinless human face, its molded frown mirroring my own. Get out of here, I whispered, feeling my eyes well up. Another of the creatures walked into view and stood behind the first. They began to softly coo at me, slowly inching closer. A third peeked around the corner at me from the kitchen, its long black fingers curled along the wall. It joined the other two, cooing quietly as the first two continued down the hall towards me. Stop it, I cried, gritting my eyes, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. And I put my hands over my ears, blocking out the sound, and closed my eyes. Just stop it. I felt something grip my shoulder and I jumped. The sudden contact scattered my sadness. I looked up and the three creatures loomed over me, their masked faces twisted as they cooed. One of them had a gnarled, clawed hand on my shoulder, and it slowly bunched around my shirt and pulled me up. Tears ran freely down my face as I allowed myself to be yanked to my feet. My eyes were blurry and bloodshot, an endless well of sadness pouring down my cheeks. The creatures pushed and prodded me into the kitchen, and I sniffled and sobbed, their hands rough and hard against me. One of them reached into the drawer and pulled out a long kitchen knife. And I shuddered, the shiny steel smiling at me. The monster held the knife out for me, the other two cooing in my ear. And without thinking, my mind awash of despair and hopelessness, I gripped the knife and took it in my hands. I placed one hand on the counter and wept, shaking my head slowly, What the hell was wrong with me? Why couldn't I just find my place in the world? What had I done to be cursed with such a miserable existence? One of the winged creatures began to stroke my head, its black hand rough against my sweaty hair. I tried to shake it off, drool leaking from my crying lips, but it continued its slow repetition. And I looked up at the three monsters, eyes pleading. Why won't you just leave me alone? I sobbed, pulling a hand across my eyes, the dull side of the knife kissing my forehead. The frowning masks offered no response, and the monster's dark wings scraped against the walls and ceiling, crowding in around me and waiting. I looked down at the knife, sniffing, and tears dripping onto the blade. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was for the best. What was I offering the world? Who would really miss me? What could I honestly do that would make any kind of difference? I was just a sad loser, a lonely, miserable person. The world didn't need me. No one needed me. The monsters cooed louder in my ear, their long black bodies pressed in against me. One of them reached out and grasped my hand with the knife, slowly moving it so that way the blade pressed down on my wrist. I looked up at them, desperate. Please. Soft coos answered my question. A hand stroked my hair like a loving mother. And I gritted my teeth, hand shaking, heart a sinking weight in my chest. Fuck it, I whispered, sobbing. I sank the blade into my wrist and I pulled it up my veins. I gasped, the pain sudden and fierce, a burning wick shooting up my arm. Blood immediately began to pour from the wound. Trails of red curled around my wrist and dripped to the floor. I immediately felt sick and then dizzy, the knife clattering to the floor, the noise shockingly loud. The monsters stepped away from me, now silent, their masked faces turning away from me. And as I slumped to the ground, a haze filled my vision. I blinked, my back to the wall, and stared into the living room. Something was wrong. A long, fleshy tube was coiling out of the floor, massive and wet. It slurped and oozed upwards like a massive worm, the size of it dwarfing me. Its skin was pink and shiny with an unknown substance. Thick trails of goo leaked onto the carpet. It twisted to face me, and I watched in horror as the folds of flesh parted to reveal a massive black mouth. There were no teeth, just a circular cord of thick gums that circled the opening. It slid closer towards me, my mind spinning. And I looked down at my wrist, the blood now pooling onto the floor around me. And I started to feel incredibly tired, but the monstrosity before me kept my eyes open and wide. The three masked creatures were standing around the fleshy tube, watching it approach me. They had been waiting for this, for the world to overwhelm me. A new fear suddenly rose in my stomach, a jolt of fading reality. I was dying. It was just the end of my sadness. It was the end of everything. The enormous, massive worm had reached my feet, its long body arched out of the floor like a living stalk. And I watched in terror as its cavernous mouth bent and scooped up my feet, slowly inching itself further and further up my legs. No, I croaked, a fire suddenly burning in my chest. No, I shouldn't have done this. No. I felt sick, the loss of blood making me woozy. I suddenly gripped my bleeding arm and pressed the wound closed. Warm red squirted between my fingers as I desperately tried to stop the flow of life leaving me. and I tried to roll away from the worm, but as I did it, it accepted more of my body into its endless mouth, a black circle of nothing. "Stop it! Stop this!" I yelled at the three monsters. Their masked faces continued to frown. Sadness emanated from their frozen features. My heart was hammering in my chest, and a cold sweat coated my pale face. I tried to drag myself to the front door with my good arm, muscles quivering with effort, desperately trying to escape the titanic worm trying to consume me, its wet mouth reaching my waist, and I howled in fear, fresh tears running down my face. "No! No, please, I'm sorry! I don't want this!" I reached the front door, the massive wet worm sliding along the floor with me, never receding an inch. Saliva dropped from its open mouth, its hard, fat gums squished around my thighs. Its presence loomed around me, and as it slid my body deeper inside of its maw, I began to scream. "I take it back! I take it back! I take it back! Please, God, don't do this!" And I began to claw and pound on my front door, weeping, throat cracking with horrified shrieks. My vision shook, darkness wrapped around the corners of my sight, closing in fast. Blood soaked my ruined arm as I pressed myself away from the enormous worm, its wet flesh squishing around my fingers like uncooked dough. And suddenly, a concerned voice erupted from the other side of the door.
"Hey, are you okay? What's going on in there?"
It was Amanda. The worm had worked itself up around my shoulders, my body lost in its dark throat. And with the last of my strength, I reached up and I twisted the door open. A scream rocketed from my lips as the fat, slurping worm devoured my shoulders. My breath rushed from my lungs and darkness curled around me, the world quaking as I felt the bloated gums cup around my throat. And as darkness took me, I saw Amanda push the door open, her face white and mouth agape. My mind turned to night, and just as I passed out, I heard her shriek for me to hold on. Just hold on. It's been 2 weeks since the awful incident. I'm doing better now. One day at a time. I'm seeing a therapist and I have moved back with my family for a while. That night, Amanda had immediately called 911 and managed to contain the bleeding just enough until the paramedics arrived. And I woke up sometime later in a hospital bed, arm wrapped and a bag of blood hanging next to me. Amanda was there, sitting beside my bed, her face pale and scared. When she saw me open my eyes, she visibly exhaled with relief. Before she could say anything, I turned away, eyes tearing, shame and self-hatred rising in my throat like acid. And to my surprise, she took my hand in hers and I turned back to look at her, wiping moisture from my face. She asked if I was okay, asked if there was anything that I needed. And I shook my head, lips trembling. She smiled sadly at me and then told me something that had changed my life. She told me that I was special. She told me that people cared for me and loved me. She told me that my family was on their way to get me, and that they had taken their first flight out as soon as the doctors had contacted them. She told me that she would stay with me until they arrived. I cried, curling into myself, comforted gently by a near stranger. Her hands brushed my hair and she remained silent as tears rolled down my face. Her kindness overwhelmed me. She didn't know me, didn't owe me anything. And yet, despite that, she had shown me her kindness. She had shown me her love. Not the kind of intimate love close friends share, but the human love that is buried inside all of us. Sometimes, exposing that love is all it takes to heal someone.